there is this verse from the Padma Purana: unless your mantra, unless your ritual, whatever it is, your initiation comes through these 4 legitimate Sampradayas, then it's considered illegitimate.
Padma Purana, Skanda Purana, it's a huge source of interpolation.
Verses inserted here and there over time.
Ramanuja never mentions any verse like this, never talks about it.
Yes, this proves the legitimacy of my Sampradaya.
Let's be clear, the Gaudiya movement predominantly uses this verse as a beating stick. If we understand human nature, if you can ever use a stick to beat anyone and make yourself look better than them, you will do it. So Chaitanya takes initiation, completely pivots and does all these other things. The Gaudis will say, yeah, but Mahaprabhu's God.
All the Sampradaya we mentioned, they don't even keep the mantra. Like the Hare Krishna mantra is not in Madhva Sampradaya.
Do other members of other Sampradayas say, yes, Mahaprabhu is God himself, and therefore whatever he brought forward is legitimate? And the answer is unequivocally no. That the avatars of the Lord are not fully listed in Shastra. That is actually the claim in Shastra.
I'm legitimate, you're not legitimate. I'm authoritative, you're not authoritative, right? And this is the Sampradāya Games that I think is utterly childish.
Jai Gurudev, Rishi Vrishaparvaananda, Jai Gurudev Mayuran.
Jai Gurudev.
So I want to explain, I think, a little bit why we're here and what we want to achieve today. Unfortunately, it almost feels like we have to do a second video on this topic, because Mayuran, we've discussed this a little bit on one of the videos that we did together, one of the episodes. You know, we have been in the process for the last couple of years now, since the inception of the Haribhakta Sampradaya. Guruji, his own Sampradaya that he has created as a part of his divine mission here on earth, as a part of the unfolding of his mission on earth. Part of that was, of course, the necessity to present a Siddhanta. What are our philosophical conclusions? What's our theology? What's all of this? And that's been an ongoing process for the last couple of years. Together with Guruji, together with the two of you and a wider team, we've been working, researching, writing, debating, sort of going through all of these topics to create what we're sort of now happy to present as our Siddhanta, right? So the Siddhanta has been completed. It's called Tadatmya Vedanta. So for those of you watching, you can see the book right here. It's not available to the public right now. And the reason for that is because it's very important that we take the time we need internally to educate our representatives, be it the Swamis, the Brahmacharis, teachers, everyone who we have within the organization, within the movement, to understand the ins and outs of this text before, obviously, we make it available to the public so that we can accurately represent it. So this will probably be made available to the public maybe within half a year, 6 months or so, depending how long it will take us to really do this educational process. But I want to, as a result of this being completed, we're going to present this to Paramahamsa Vishwananda today, actually. As a result of this, on the podcast, we wanted to do a 3-part series. We're going to be doing a 3-part series, 3 episodes, discussing some of the fundamental points of this Siddhanta. And as I said, unfortunately, we're kicking it off with this first one, which is we have to reestablish what is a Sampradaya, what is the landscape of Sampradayas, what is the issues that we face, because we've been heavily criticized for the creation of a new Sampradaya, for the way it's been done and the things we've been saying about it, in a sense. It's ruffled feathers. And sometimes people do it just to get some clout, just to sort of, make ourselves be heard. But Guruji thinks that there's something fundamental that needs to be explained here, needs to be touched upon. And so this is the first of these 3 series. We're going to touch upon this topic of the 4 Sampradayas, especially their exclusivity within the world of Vaiṣṇavism. The second episode, we're going to be talking about Tadatmya Vedanta, which is our Vedanta itself, unpacking it, dissecting it, explaining the way in which it was constructed. And then the third episode will be discussing our unique take on the various tattvas within this Siddhanta. So discussing Vishnu tattva, discussing Jiva tattva, Guru tattva, etc., from our perspective, so that we can clarify the exact positions that we take. And on a plus side, on a positive side, one of the things I think we all hope to achieve by doing these 3 episodes is to clarify a lot of the misconceptions that are out there against the Haribhakta Sampradaya, against Guruji, and against our claims. A lot of misinterpretation, a lot of conjecture, wrong points being made. I can point those out today as we go through it. We've all had our interactions. We all know the sort of things that we're regularly accused of. And I think the best thing is to address them head on, and we will over the course of these 3 episodes. So, without further ado, I think let's just dive into the topic, discussing this notion of 4 exclusive Vaishnava Sampradayas as being the only legitimate way by which one can not only have a relationship with God, but more importantly, receive legitimate teaching, legitimate sadhana, legitimate initiation, legitimate mantra, and achieve legitimate outcomes, realizations. As we know, this notion of it being authoritative and exclusive stems from the idea that it is in Shastra, that this topic can be found in Shastra. So maybe we can just go to the verse. Mayuran, if you want to kick us off, and then from there we can unpack it a little bit.
Yeah, so just very quickly, Sanatana Dharma, this is what we talked about in our podcast, it'll be the first one we did. Sanatana Dharma is like this jungle, chaos, all kinds of philosophies, all kinds of rituals, paths and so on, saints, sages, gurus and avatars and so on. And so imagine a jungle that's really chaotic, and then you go into an oasis and you find a very clear civilization with a hospital, a school, and a system of governance, whatever it is. That organized system within the kind of jungle and chaos of Sanatana Dharma is what I would class as an example of a Sampradaya. It's a consolidated, organized, systematic understanding of your path, where you're going, your rituals, what your goal is, or your sadhana, and so on. And Vaishnavism has numerous Sampradayas, but there is a claim, as you just said, that there are only 4 legitimate Sampradayas. And if you don't take your teaching from those 4 legitimate Sampradayas, then somehow you are illegitimate. Somehow you are not bona fide, or you should be cast aside. It's manufactured. It's not really divine revelation in any sense. So that's the kind of point that's on the table, and that's certainly a point that's been leveled at us. And it kind of goes like this, and it's kind of like a role play that I'll do, because I think we've all faced it, and I think many devotees are facing it. It's kind of like this online trolling sort of thing that sometimes happens, which is, we chant this mantra, Shri Vittala Giridhari Parabrahmane Namaha, which is what Guruji has given us. It's our kind of mula mantra, the foundation of our Sampradaya. And then what you'll get sometimes is a comment on, let's say, a website or YouTube video, which says, goes something like this. It sort of says, Hari Bol Prabhu, Hari Bol, right? Then there'll be, oh, that's a nice, interesting mantra that you're chanting. And we say, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, it's given. And you go, where did you get this mantra from? It's very interesting. And we'll say, it was given to us by our Guru Maharaj. It was revealed to him and he's passed it down to us. Oh, that's very interesting. Do you know if it comes from these 4 Sampradayas? And then maybe a devotee who probably doesn't know about this will say, oh, I don't know. What do you mean by these 4 Sampradayas? Well, there is this verse from the Padma Purana that clearly states that unless your mantra, unless your ritual, whatever it is, your initiation comes through these 4 legitimate Sampradayas, then it's considered illegitimate. And then at this point, the Bhakti Marga devotees kind of shrugging their shoulders, going, don't really know where this has come from. I don't really understand it, and so on. So that's really what we're addressing today. And I want to read that verse. It's from the Padma Purana, and you'll notice I'm not going to reference it, which we'll talk about later. It goes like this. Any mantra that does not come in a disciplic succession is considered to be fruitless. Therefore, 4 divine individuals will appear in the age of Kali to found disciplic schools. The founders of these 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas are Lakshmi or Śrī, Brahma, Rudra, Sanaka Rishi, and the acharyas of the Kali age who follow their lines will appear in the holy city of Purushottama in Orissa. So the verse is basically saying from the Padma Purana that there are 4 legitimate Sampradayas. It names the 4 founding deities, Lakshmi, Brahma, Rudra, Sanaka, in the age of Kali. It's a prophetic verse. So apparently this was written thousands and thousands, maybe in a different age, prophesizing that this is the way you gain legitimacy for your lineage. It has to pass through these 4 Sampradayas. And that's the issue that I think we're looking at today.
Yeah, I think this is correctly pointed out. So there's a couple of issues with that verse. First, we'll address them in due course today. But one is the mantra issue. The mantra is fruitless unless it comes from these 4. Second is that there is only these 4. These are the 4 that are there. and they're named, so there's no room for ambiguity, right? No. They're named not only by deities, and I think that from there, there is, and then of course there's the final topic, which we'll also touch upon later. I think Vrishaparvaananda, you'll make the point about the city of Purushottama in Orissa. We'll come to that in a little bit. The way that mantra, that verse is usually leveled at us, one has been pointed out. Your mantra doesn't come from any of these four Sampradayas, does it? Therefore, illegitimate. I think the other way that it's often used is to say that essentially, unless you can trace an initiation lineage, diksha, or at the very least shiksha, into one of these four Sampradayas.
Diksha meaning initiation, siksha meaning instruction.
Yeah. Now, unless you're taking that in a let's say authorized way from one of these four, your entire movement essentially is non-legitimate. Fruitless. I think that word fruitless is a good word to capture, I think, what they often are trying to carry in these accusations.
You're just shooting in the wind, it's meaningless.
Yeah. So I think, apologies, there's many ways in which we can dissect this. I think let's begin essentially by talking about who does this, who uses this, and in what way, predominantly speaking. From my experience, this notion of the four Sampradayas is usually thrown at us from newer movements. It is not something that I've encountered from older Vaishnava movements and older Sampradayas. If you speak to Śrī Vaisṇavas, for example, as I have often done in my life, in fact, I think all three of us are in our Śrī Vaisṇava discussion group with hundreds of Śrī Vaisṇavas, authoritative Śrī Vaisṇavas. They never, ever stress this point. They care not for this point. It's not something that is relevant to them in the slightest. There is something to be said for that. As I said, there are newer movements that stress this. The older movements, older Sampradayas, quote unquote, have no interest in this alleged verse. Alleged why? Because, as you said, not referenced. It's incredibly convenient that this prophetic verse is not actually referenced with any chapter, verse, etc., and cannot be found in any critical editions of Padma Purana that are actually in surviving these days. Let's put it like this. Now, of course, we all know that there is an oral tradition within the Vedic culture, but nonetheless, that oral tradition has never been committed to text, including said verse. So I think that's fundamentally one set of people that use this. It's a very recent issue, quote unquote. And then I think the other side of it is political. It's politicized even. If you see the Akara system within India, now just to explain what the Akara system is, Akaras are like spiritual governments. So they exist, it originally stems from Shankaracharya. They were essentially warrior monks that were trained up within ashrams in order to protect themselves from external threats, be it physical invasions, whatever it may be. Philosophically, Adi Shankaracharya had made his philosophy as an intellectual shield to external attacks. The Akaras were meant to be a bodily shield, in a sense, against external attacks. Since then, the concept has changed and evolved a lot. I think these days the Akaras are more almost like unions, spiritual unions of sorts, where you have these employees,
trade unions,
coming together, fighting for the rights of Hindus and the rights of these specific Akaras in very political contexts. Within the Akara system, within the Vaishnavas that are present in the Akara system, they also speak about this Char Sampradaya, four Sampradayas. They have a four Sampradaya All India Commission where they have authorities there from representatives from each of these Sampradayas, and they like to act like that's also a very authoritative thing. Again, having spoken to members of said Sampradayas, they don't care in the slightest. It's not like the president of the All India Four Sampradaya Akara institution has any sway or say on what happens within each of these four Sampradayas that we're talking about.
Vishwananda, you've taken quite a lot of lessons and from top scholars in the Śrī Vaisṇava tradition. What do they say about the four Sampradayas in your?
No, they don't take it in any way as an authority. As you said, from the Padma Purana, and you say I will not reference. I will not give any reference. The first thing is Padma Purana, Skanda Purana. They are huge. And it is well known by scholars, they always mention in the academic field, Padma Purana, Skanda Purana, it's a huge source of interpolation. And so, anytime some academic person reads something, Padma Purana, and there is no chapter, canto, verse, or any of those, automatically it's a bit already brushed aside. It can't be something very authoritative just by that. But as you say, also the Śrī Vaisṇava, they don't. For them, it's really not important, those things. Because for them, the most important to what I understood from them is they have to follow the Veda. So if the Sampradaya follow some Vedic concepts, they will accept. If they go astray from Vedic concepts, they will reject.
So you would class it from their side, the Puranas as not straying, but at least not in the Vedic fold.
No, not that. But if a Sampradaya follow the Vedic, accept Narayana as the highest being, accept Sharanagati, accept Bhakti, then they will accept that.
Yeah.
If the Sampradaya deviate from that, then it will not do. So it's purely Vedic.
Their criteria for acceptance is basically alignment with Shastra, alignment with the Vedic literature,
and especially the Vedic one.
Are you one of these four?
Especially like the Upanishad, Samhitas, and the early, very core Vedic literature.
But you raise a good point there, Vrishaparvaananda, but which is basically, you told me this after speaking to some scholars, that if you go to the south and there's some verse or some concept, and you don't know you can't really remember where it's from, you kind of just go, it's from the Skanda Purana. Because it's so huge, no one's going to check.
Yeah.
Right? No one's going to bother reading through it. And so it's just kind of this running joke. In the south, you say it's from the Skanda Purana. If it's the north...
Padma Purana, you say.
Padma Purana. So you've got these two massive Puranas, right, which are so huge, which are potentially rife with interpolations. Verses inserted here and there over time. And I think it's very worth pointing out, Puranic literature, let's say apart from the Bhagavatam and Vishnu Purana in particular, Puranic literature does not have the same commentarial tradition, like say the Upanishads, does the principal Upanishads, or even the Bhagavad Gita itself. Yeah. And so they're later texts, so they haven't been strenuously preserved, let's say, the effort.
In the same way, no.
Yeah, sure. Not in the same way as the Vedic revelation at all, Bhagavad Gita and so on. So therefore, they are liable and vulnerable to, let's just be honest, made up verses.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the crux of the situation with the Padma Purana.
And I think I have met plenty of people. Look, let's be clear. The Gaudiya movement predominantly uses this verse as a beating stick for others. It is a fact. And yet I have met many people within the movement that start to make jokes about this verse as well, in the sense that they accept that this most likely is fraudulent. But there is an issue. And the issue, I think, and I almost sympathize with the issue, is when your Acharya has used the verse or spoken on this verse and given it authority, not because it's necessarily from Padma Purana chapter and verse, but I agree with this principle as a Tattvadarshi, as a person who is supposedly here to give, let's say, pure instruction to my disciples, and I say this verse is legitimate, or I comment on it, or I include it in my points, it almost removes the possibility for any disciples of said Acharya to dismiss the verse as being interpolation and made up, because it's been given a second degree of authority by the use of the verse by their Acharya. I think that's a really important point. Why? Because the reason the Sri Vaishnavas are so easily dismissing it, Ramanuja never talks about this. Ramanuja never mentions any verse like this, never talks about it in his many works. Same thing is true of the other Sampradayas. There's just absolutely no use or reference to this.
Yeah.
And so I want to go a little bit to the historicity of this, because it's important to see where it starts.
But can we just take that as, just pause on that?
Yeah.
Let everyone understand, this is a prophetic verse. Yeah. It's basically saying thousands of years ago, apparently, this is how the narrative goes with this verse, thousands of years ago, this verse turned up, and it was basically saying, we are predicting in the great age of Kali, where Dharma is on the decline, these four great acharyas, or these four lineages will come forth, and this will be this exclusive avenue to reach the love of God and the ultimate goal of life. That's what the claim is. Yet none of these Sampradayas, none of the chief founding acharyas or the main acharyas of these Sampradayas are commenting on this verse in any way. None of their principal disciples, say Vedanta Desika and so on, Pillai Lokacharya, you're not finding them going to this verse going, yes, this proves the legitimacy of my Sampradaya. It's so strange that a prophetic verse as detailed and precise as this is not being commented on by the main four Sampradayas themselves. It would be ridiculous. I mean, I've made this point before, but it would be like a verse saying Paramahamsa Vishwananda is going to come in the Kali age and establish the Haribhakta Sampradaya and he who have his base in Germany, Frankfurt, right? Yeah. And this is in like, say, the Padma Purana or Skanda Purana, and none of us comment on it.
Our preaching would be so much easier.
Yeah, we would just show this verse and dangle it to everyone, right?
Accept.
Everyone has to accept.
You're obviously, what you're saying now is incredibly problematic for people who do make this claim. Ramanuja spends 120 years on earth here. He spends many years debating and traveling and converting people away from Advaitism, away from Buddhism, away from whatever else. And it's almost comical because, as you said, he could just point Shastra and say, I'm prophesied right here. This is my tradition, my lineage. Accept. There's no need for us to engage in debate. The same thing with Madhava, the same thing with others. So I think there is a lot of, let's say, just through logic, a lot of problems. I want to unpack that again a little further later, but I want to let's just follow this thread again for the historicity issue, because I think it's important to understand where it starts, and why as I said, some people choose to use it more than others. In terms of written academic, let's say, consensus, there is only this verse is only referenced, rather. The first time is by a Ramananda Swami, Ramanandi disciple, and this is
from Nabadas,
in his Bhaktamal. So in the Bhaktamal, he speaks about the four Sampradāyas. He speaks about the four Acharyas. But what's very critical here, and this was spoken to by James P. Hare, he did his thesis on the Bhaktamal of Nabadas, and he basically said what's really important to note is that Nabadas never used that verse as a claim that only these four Acharyas are legitimate. He listed them among many other legitimate Vaishnavas. He basically presented a whole garland, a whole family of Vaishnavas at his time that had been around in the sort of years prior that were legitimate. And important to note, he doesn't, when he lists the four principal Acharyas, he doesn't list Ramanujacharya. He actually presents Ramananda Swami in the place of Ramanujacharya as the principal Acharya of that lineage.
So Vrishaparvaananda, what age was this? What time frame we're talking about?
16th century. 16th century, around that time. It was the time where this verse came about, kind of. 16th, 17th century. And before that, there is no mention. I think the first one is Gora Ganodesha Dipika from Kavikarnapura. So in the Gaudiya.
Which is already Gaudiya movements. So since then it's appeared widely, I would say throughout the centuries in many different texts, but all of them by Gaudiya authors.
But even there, some would say that even there in Kavikarnapura, it's already an interpolation. They brought it later on. Yeah. But
you're saying some people are saying even that itself.
Even that itself is not from him. It was added later on.
So you say
just to give more like ancient.
You're saying this all came about in the 16th century.
Yeah, 16, 17. Yeah.
Okay, and before that, absolute radio silence on the four Sampradāyas.
No, nothing. As you quote Vedanta Deshika and all these great Pillai Lokacharya and all these. They never mentioned those things.
So just to make that clear again. I just want to make these points really clear. Absolute radio silence on the four Sampradāya as the exclusive way to Krishna or Narayana until about the 15th, 16th century.
Vallabhacharya did mention that some Sampradāya were very prevalent in his time. But for example, in this, he don't mention Nimbaka.
Right.
So it's it was just like, the situation is like that. It wasn't like this one, they are the only one who can do something.
So Vallabha is simply describing the context of his time.
He was talking about his time,
Right,
yeah.
And you mentioned that the Ramanandis, they're simply saying, look, this is the context of my time. These are some great Sampradāyas, these four Sampradāyas, and there's other stuff going on and so on. So it's mentioned as a matter of fact kind of way, not this kind of doctrine of you must only come from these four Sampradāyas, otherwise you are not legitimate.
Although the Ramanandi, later on, some of them become more radicalized on that, because they even attacked the Gaudiya on this point.
Okay.
In Jaipur. Jaipur, because
well, I think
with Govind Devji.
if we understand human nature, if you can ever use a stick to beat anyone and make yourself look better than them, you will do it, right? And I think this is the funny thing. As I said, earlier movements, no use of it, radio silence, as we said. Later movements, the later a movement is, the more it has to fight for legitimacy because it has to compete with others. Mm-hmm. When Ramanuja comes, there is no Vaishnava Sampradaya established that he has to compete with, in a sense, right? When the Ramanandis come, when the Gaudiyas come, when we come, in a sense, you have a landscape to compete with, that you have to justify your existence almost. You have to prove why someone should accept you when there are already others established since a long time. Yep. And so it's not surprising that if we just take a purely psychological look on this, that these movements would develop this propensity to fight or the propensity to prove themselves. And part of the propensity to fight and prove yourself is that one of the easiest ways to do that is not to elevate yourself, but to put down others.
Yeah.
And if you can do both at the same time, both elevate yourself and put down someone else, you've hit the sweet spot. And so I think there's a lot to be said for that as well, because it's just a sociological sort of observation as to who and when these points start to be made, by whom and when do they make them. There is a lot of, like I said, observable psychological and sociological reasons as to why that would happen.
Look, so you're making the point that this is effectively political Vaishnavism at play. Not devotional Vaishnavism, which is essentially, I love Krishna, I want to surrender to Krishna, I want to give my life to him. That's, I would class as devotional Vaishnavism, which would unite all of us, right? All the Sampradayas without fail. This is political Vaishnavism born of, put it bluntly, insecurity.
Yes.
Right? It's primarily insecurity. You're a new movement, potentially. That's why you say it comes up later, as you said, in the 16th, 15th century. It comes up later. You're new. You have to establish yourself, assert yourself on the Vaishnava scene, on the religious scene. How do you do that? I know, let me dangle this verse which has suddenly appeared in the Padma Purana, which then gives exclusivity. And if I can tag along with these great Sampradayas, the four Sampradayas, then I gain legitimacy. And this is what I call the Sampradāya Games, right? It's a game because really Sampradaya should be about, yes, authority of your founding Acharya, consistency, so that all your Sangha and your community work together in a consistent way. The legacy of his teachings need to be passed through. And so it has a profound utility. That's what a Sampradaya is there for, a profound utility to get you closer to Krishna. What's happening here is, it's where authority has been put on steroids. The emphasis on authority is put on steroids. So therefore it becomes about my Sampradaya is authoritative, and how do I bolster that claim? As you said, I have to put down the other Sampradaya. And that's where it starts to become tribal and political. We have now left the realm of worshipping Krishna and being devoted to Krishna and surrendering to Krishna. We're now looking around going, how do I establish my movement in front of everyone else? And you're basically looking over the fence at other Sampradayas and saying, what are their weaknesses? Let me try and beat them with this verse from the Padma Purana, which has suddenly appeared in the 15th, 16th century, which has no reference from before, no commentarial tradition, and then suddenly we use this as the weapon to bolster our claim for legitimacy. We move to this thing of, I'm bona fide, you're not bona fide. I'm legitimate, you're not legitimate. I'm authoritative, you're not authoritative, right? And this is the Sampradāya Games that I think is utterly childish, to be honest.
To piggyback off of that, I think sometimes it's easier to look outside and look at others to gain some insight. When you look at yourself, sometimes you have a distorted view, right? If we look at the Christian world, at the Muslim world, you see this going on as well.
Yeah.
Same political games, different sects fighting against each other for legitimacy, saying you're not legitimate, you're not this, you're not that, your lineage is wrong, whatever. As Vaishnavas looking from the outside, and you just go, oh yeah, what a shame. It's so silly. It makes no sense. They should just unite around the fact that they're all followers of Christ or followers of Muhammad or whatever it may be. And then when you see internally, no. Then you play the same game, you make the same fight, as easy as it is to identify and criticize outside. But because it is present in all these religions, again, it harkens back to what I was saying earlier. I think it's very much observable and understood by these sort of psychological, sociological factors. It is insecurity.
Yep.
And if I would just be able to sit here and calmly say to everybody, learn to be comfortable with other people not liking what you do or not accepting. Don't need validation from others. Yeah, you have your own heart, you have your own relationship, you have your own community. You don't need validation from others. It's maybe nice to get it. Maybe there are advantages to be had. I'm not denying these things. But if you make it a priority in your life, if this becomes a pursuit, a maddening pursuit of external validation, not only is it A, not spiritual and often B, fed by the false ego that wants to be sort of recognized and validated, it will lead you down exactly this road of fighting, of denigrating, of engaging in the Sampradāya Games, as you pointed out. I want to make another point in connection to this. The way that the Sampradayas, as I said, nowadays I have met members of other Sampradayas that also tout these verses, because this is the nature of how ideas develop. Because the Gaudiya Sampradaya has emphasized this so much for so long, and they are very influential. Yeah, they're absolutely very
especially
influential
in the
these
West,
days,
yeah.
especially in the West.
Yeah.
a lot of other members of other Sampradayas have started to sort of buy into it in a very superficial way. So I don't mean at the highest level, the highest authority, scholars, all of this, but I have met Śrī Vaishnavas go, oh yeah, 4 Sampradayas. I've met nominal Vaishnavas, nominal Indians on the internet who just go, 4 Sampradayas. That's the way it works. Yeah, because they've heard it and they've heard it from this place and that place, and it starts to propagate. So one of the issues that I think in a sense has to be called out as a result of that is this. The political nature of it goes one step further. When we say politics, what's the next word that you associate with politics? Games, deceit, maybe. Yeah. Some falsehood.
Mm-hmm. Sleaze,
right? And so, why do I bring this up? In front of each other, in diplomatic circles, or in situations that require diplomacy, you will always hear them speak nicely about each other. 4 legitimate Sampradayas, no points of criticism, all different in their own way, but all legitimate. Wonderful. These are the 4 bona fide Sampradayas.
As you say, in the Akada, there is these 4.
Yeah, seemingly
they
united.
live together, and in some way. Yeah.
Now separate them, pull them aside, and speak to them, and see how the tune changes so quickly and so consistently. I'll give you 3 examples. So the first, within the Śrī Vaishnava group, there are, like I said, authoritative, learned scholars in there. If you ask them, do you consider the other 3 Sampradayas, as per this 4 Sampradaya model, to be legitimate? The very question for them is only understood of, do you mean their Vedanta? Do you mean the Siddhanta? Because what else is there to question? They worship Śrī Hari. What are we doing there? But obviously we're not going to challenge them on this. They're not in this idea of this 4 exclusive Sampradayas, mantras, etc. So they're just looking at it philosophically speaking. So philosophically they look at that and say, no, of course not. Only our Sampradaya is correct. Ramanuja fought to establish Vishishta Advaita because Vishishta Advaita is the truth. Mm-hmm. So therefore Dvaita of Madhva is just wrong. They'll say it openly. Yeah. If you talk to them about Achintya Bheda Bheda, and you say, yes, but now Mahaprabhu has evolved this concept. He has brought the worship of Radha, and he's brought this, and he's brought that. They'll sit there and say, okay, we can respect. But if you ask me, my personal opinion, it's wrong. Mm. Yeah. I've had that multiple times.
Even in terms of worship, like you mentioned Madhvas and Śrī Vaishnava. The Śrī Vaishnava, they're extremely, extremely strong on not worshipping anybody else.
Yes, absolutely.
And you see, if you go to Raghavendra Swami Samadhi, I think you went.
Yes, I did, yeah.
You worship Durga before, you worship Shiva before. And there is a lot of deity worship like that, of different deity than Srimad Narayan. And this in Śrī Vaishnava will be completely like against the core.
Absolutely.
So even on that.
But you see, there I have less of an issue. And I want to make that clear. Like, if the Sampradayas only differed on preferred deity, customs like the periphery, like the clothes they wear, whatever, these kind of things, or it was just about rasa, bhava, moods that they emphasize differently, I'd have no issues. The issue is not that. And I don't think the acharyas of these Sampradayas would have issues either. They would be like, oh yeah, they prefer this deity and this mood, we prefer this one. End of story. I think it's when you go to the level of tattva, when you're really discussing nature of the soul, nature of God, composition of reality, where these things are irreconcilable. When I had my conversation with Hridayananda Goswami, this would be my second example, right? One of the questions I posed to him, sort of prominent ISKCON Acharya, one of the questions I posed to him was, do you see Śrī Vaishnavism and Gaudiya, the Gaudiya Sampradaya, as being one right, one wrong, equally right? What's your take on it? Because and I really sort of tried to get him to take a stance, because from my experience, again, in the public eye will say, yeah, all legitimate, but when you question and when you start to dig deeper, they'll criticize. So he said something interesting. He said, I don't see Ramanuja as being wrong. That's not how I would phrase it. I just simply think that the Gaudiya tradition with the Goswamis and Mahaprabhu has brought more tools to the table. We have more tools with which to explain
an expansion
reality.
On Ramanuja.
So superior. Yeah. Again, diplomatic way of saying this is an evolution. It's a superior thing. Now, I understand why he would say that, and I don't begrudge him that belief. But do you think a Śrī Vaishnava hearing that would go, yes, no problem. I fully accept that you think your philosophy, or not that you think, that factually your philosophy has more tools and is a more evolved version of ours.
Well, they would take an approach of, Śrī Vaishnava is the pure original. And this is an extra peripheral manufacturing thing.
And the only one which stands. Because the concept of Beda Beda is completely outside of of discussion for the Sri Vaishnava.
Yeah.
Is Vishishtadvaita, and Vedanta Deshika wrote books about that, refuting all darshanas one by one. So there is no question of, maybe we accept that also. They are very strict.
Absolutely.
Very strict.
And in the same conversation, he then says, as he realized that he was drawing a very united front between the Sri Vaishnavas, Ramanuja, and the Goswamis, he then says, Madhva, however, he got it wrong. He
said that point blank.
Yes.
Yeah.
He says,
so just to repeat, what did he say again?
Madhva got it wrong.
Madhva got it wrong. Okay.
And so now, of course, you may just sort of denounce Hridayananda Goswami and say it's just his opinion. But this is what I routinely encounter when you pin people down on these points. And there is logical grounds for it.
But that's quite a huge statement, in my opinion. Yeah. So if you're part of a Sampradaya, and he's an extremely knowledgeable personality, right?
Nobody would say he's not knowledgeable.
Extremely knowledgeable. And if he is openly declaring to you, point blank, and just saying Madhva got it wrong, and then the basis of his philosophically, and if the basis of his initiation of his Sampradaya and the legitimacy of his Sampradaya comes from the Madhva Sampradaya, and you've got one of the most eminent, swamis, sannyasis, actually declaring that, I think it's pretty huge, personally.
I agree with you. And it leads on therefore to my third example. So my first example was the Sri Vaishnavas that we pinned down. They said, only us. Mm-hmm. The others are wrong. Hridayananda Maharaj, who basically said, we're an evolution on Sri Vaishnavism, but Madhva got it wrong. And then my third example is the Madhva Sampradaya themselves. When they were questioned, I forget the name of the Acharya.
Śrī Hari from the Purna Prajna Vidyapit. Yeah,
there we go. So when he was pressed on the matter, because he was pressed on the matter of not only the Gaudiya position about the four Sampradayas, etc., but just general stance on this idea that seemingly there are four legitimate Sampradayas. And he said, how can there be? Essentially, he was like, this is the concept, the very concept is nonsensical, because there cannot be four true visions of reality, and only our vision of Madhvacharya is correct.
You might call it dogmatic, but he's being pretty sincere and just rationally stating the truth. But we talked about the Gaudiyas in relation to the Madhva. The Gaudiyas call themselves officially the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, and then you had Hridayananda Goswami basically saying Madhva got it wrong philosophically.
Well, you don't need to go to... Yes, he did, but you don't need to go to him. In a sense, Chaitanya Mahāprabhu said Madhva got it wrong philosophically by not taking any of his philosophical positions forward.
Yeah.
Even in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's
what will happen?
He talked with... Mahaprabhu is said to have a discussion with a follower of Madhva. And he say, in your Sampradaya, there's only one concept that I accept, is that you worship the form of God. All the rest is completely to be refuted. So completely different than his view.
So he's fishing through all of the Madhva.
No, it's very interesting, because if you say that Mahaprabhu was a disciple, came in this lineage, succession, and then he come to this place and he discuss with this scholar, and he say, in your Sampradaya.
Yeah.
He don't identify himself as belonging to that.
Yeah.
And we see in Jiva Goswami the same. In all the Goswami, they never mention Madhva.
This is
as an
massive.
Acharya.
It is.
So just, Vrishaparvaananda, unpack that. What did you just say?
No, just so to say that even Jiva Goswami, the only, to my knowledge, the only time he mentioned Madhva in the Sandarbhas, which are huge, is in the Tattva Sandarbha. So I have the Anucheda, so it's 24:1. He mentioned Madhvacharya, and he say he come from a Ekdandi Sannyas lineage, so the Tirtha, one of the Dashanami. And that's the only place he mentioned Madhva. And he associates...
You're going to have to unpack that slowly, because you're just jumping, and everyone who's listening to understand.
He associates Madhvacharya with somebody who comes from the lineage of Shankara.
Right. And it comes from the lineage of Shankara, not because of the philosophy, but because of the... Initiation.
He just mentioned that. And if Mahaprabhu was really from this lineage, there would be a huge Mangalam. There will be something huge in the very beginning of the Sandarbhas, mentioning even that. Because Madhva was a great Vedanta.
So Jiva
Goswami...
So
there's no way they will put him aside, you know what I mean?
I'm just trying to pack your points. So Jiva Goswami in the Tattva Sandarbha, which establishes the whole philosophical system, the pramana and everything else. And he basically praises Madhvacharya as being of the same initiated lineage, originating from Shankara.
I don't think it's a praise. I think it's just a mention.
Okay, just a mention.
Because I have to see the context, but he talked about the different commentaries on the Bhagavatam. And he mentioned the one of Madhvacharya, which is, of course, one of the most authoritative.
And your point is, if Mahaprabhu, and it was recognized that Mahaprabhu had taken initiation with the Madhva
the
lineage,
link would have been made there.
Jiva Goswami, in his Tattva Sandarbha, would have obviously referenced that and then actually made a huge deal out of that, probably.
And that's what Kavikarnapura is said to have done. That's what Baladeva Vidyabhushan did later on. They say they give the whole lineage.
So there's a
radio... But the Goswami, they didn't do that.
So even in the Gaudiya lineage, there's a radio silence from the originating forefathers of the philosophical system, establishing the Sampradaya, Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami, and so on. None of them mention
none of them.
This link. And then it comes up in the 15th, 16th century with the Padma Purana and some other later sources as well.
Yeah.
So the writings of the consequent acharyas and consequent personalities in the Gaudiya tradition, they start to emphasize it more and to push it more.
Also, Baladeva Vidyabhushan, he mentioned this verse, and he's a very important acharya in Gaudiya Vaishnavism.
Right, but he was tasked, don't you think? But the Baladev, again, give me the dates, 16th century again?
16th, 17th.
Yeah. So he was tasked with establishing the Gaudiya Sampradaya on a very kind of orthodox footing.
Because the Ramanandi, they challenged them. They say you are not authoritative because you don't have any bhashya on the Brahma Sutras.
Right, and that's when he wrote the commentaries on the Prasthana the Govinda Bhashya.
So he came from Hadakund.
Right, and this is where... Right, so in response to this, you are not legitimate, you are not authoritative, and he's establishing, out of love for Mahaprabhu, his lineage, that's when the four Sampradayas seems to be coming around this time.
A bit earlier, but around that time it was very strong, apparently. It was a very well-known concept because the Ramanandi, they came with that. Then the Gaudiya, they also had to face that. And Baladeva Vidyabhushan, he had a link with the Madhvas from his family. He came from that.
So he has a family link.
He became a Gaudiya after. And that's why some say, if you check different book on philosophy, Indian philosophy, they would say, and Gaudiya scholar would agree, like Satyanarayan Das Babaji, that the philosophy of Baladeva Vidyabhushan and the later Gaudiya is different than Jiva Goswami philosophy. Because he brings some of the points in his Govinda Bhashya, he brings some of the philosophical points from Madhva. For example, the principle of Vishesha and this kind of very specific thing. We don't need to talk about it now, but very specific thing from Madhvacharya's
Would you class
philosophy.
it as a slight deviation even from Jiva Goswami?
I think the Gaudiya themselves would say that.
Yeah.
They would say it's not a big deal because it's just different. It didn't change the full thing, but still.
Some subtle differences.
Still. And if you say the philosophy come from, I don't know, Brahma and, then there's a big problem because you have Madhvacharya with one philosophy. Then Jiva Goswami and then Baladeva even make some difference then as if Jiva Goswami wasn't right in the very, it's so, right. Of course there's some problem.
But I think it's important at this point, Simon Revity, what we're doing is, look, we're not just being difficult and being, combative just for the sake of it. We're just trying to highlight that the clean narrative of Brahma gave this to, Narada Muni and so on, and it comes down through the Madhva lineage and then Vyasa, and then, Mahaprabhu gets initiated, and now we have the pure knowledge. That narrative just doesn't stand, right? And I think, again, from our very first podcast that we did, my goal is for everyone just to get real. Let's get real. Because when you start making these very tribal, faith-driven Sampradāya games, politically motivated to bolster your claims and so on, it gets very childish. It can't stand. Once you know the evidence and you start doing the research, you can't really say it with a straight face anymore. And I think we just need to be more grounded in our approach so that we actually realize we're just here to love God. We have a legacy and a consistency and a wonderful pathway and that's why Sampradaya is such a great thing and it provides a massive utility. But let's not elevate it to these ridiculous levels and make these outlandish, bombastic claims which have no basis.
Ahistorical.
Which are not needed also in any way.
I would also say that just to characterize the conversation, first of all, I agree, but the conversation that you two were having, especially about the heritage in a sense of the Gaudiya movement and the connection to the Madhva Sampradaya, I think it's important for us to understand why these things are relevant to the argument. And the reason is essentially we're saying that these Gaudiyas are trying to prove their legitimacy not exclusively by the merits of Mahaprabhu's teachings and personality, but by both that and the link to a pre-existing bona fide Sampradaya, i.e. the Madhva Sampradaya. There are two fundamental issues with this. So the first is, as we've started to unpack here, the link between them is very tenuous, and even if it were to be proved, even if someone now comes up and brings historical evidence that Mahaprabhu was initiated legitimately by a legitimate Madhva Sampradaya Acharya of some sort, and that Acharya has a legitimate lineage, even if that was the case, which, as we just said, is dubious to some extent, but even if that was the case, what is the merit of that? What is the merit of being initiated in there? If you then state, as he did in Chaitanya Charitamrita, I only like one thing, I'm only taking one thing from your entire Sampradaya, and that's that you worship the form of God. It's such a, in a sense, basic and fundamental universal principle across Vaishnava Sampradayas that it's not even characteristic of the Madhva Sampradaya. It's not that Madhva exclusively worships the form of God, and therefore that link had to be established in order to take that. So does Ramanuja Sampradaya, so does others. It's just a sort of trivial point almost, and therefore the in between the lines meaning is, I reject what you're saying essentially. I'm presenting something entirely different and entirely new. That being the case, why would you want to align yourself with the Madhva Sampradaya in order to prove something when your very Acharya in a sense denounces them and says, you've got nothing for me, right? But hold on. That being the point, if you've got nothing for me and I'm presenting something new, I then flip the game, flip the script on the Gaudiyas and say, what is now your way of handling that? How do you reconcile the fact that a person came, took initiation, went against the philosophies and conclusions of that bona fide lineage of teaching and made his own, fabricated his own philosophy, or his disciples did, the Goswamis, right? Now, I know what the answer is going to be, because there is only one way to get out of that conundrum, because that is the archetypal situation that they would otherwise criticize. You join the Sampradaya, okay, well done, but then you've distorted all the teachings and completely, made your own, fabricated. We get accused of that routinely. Paramahamsa Vishwananda was legitimately initiated into the Sri Sampradaya in Srirangam.
How do we know he's legitimate?
Because I've met his Acharya who initiated him. Okay, he exists, he's there, you can speak to him.
I've seen the photos.
The Acharya will say, I did initiate him. Now, if you press the Acharya, Vedavyaspataranga Acharya, and you say to him, do you agree with everything he's consequently...
Who you met?
I've seen his place, we've met his family, etc. Yes. Yeah. We then say, would you... He has been questioned. Do you agree with everything that Swami Vishwananda has done consequently? He'll say no. He has to say no, because it's not Śrī Vaisṇava orthodoxy, right? Yeah. But he won't deny, I legitimately initiated him, right? And then we are criticized for saying, you took a legitimate initiation, fine, but you've gone on to, bastardize the thing and do all sorts of things and make all sorts of distortions, okay?
Yeah.
Now, our defense is the exact same defense they make to their situation. So Chaitanya takes initiation, completely pivots and does all these other things. By the way, we always kept way more Śrī Vaisṇava principles in our philosophy, in our lives, spiritual lives, than the Gaudiyas kept from Madhva. But that's a moot point. The Gaudiyas will say, yeah, but Mahaprabhu's God. So that reconciles any potential issue, because he's the original Tattvadarshi. He is Bhagavan himself. Therefore, he is completely within his right to reject whatever Madhva brought forward and bring something else forward. Great. I am fine with that, because it's a very, very similar claim that we make with Paramahamsa Vishwananda and the Haribhakta Sampradaya. Now, the problem here is, does anyone else, especially members of the other four Sampradayas that you so much want to cling on to, recognize and accept that logic? Do other members of other Sampradayas say, yes, Mahaprabhu is God himself, and therefore whatever he brought forward is legitimate? And the answer is unequivocally no. Unequivocally no. I have not met a single authoritative person from the Sri Sampradaya, for example, who says, yes, Chaitanya Mahāprabhu is Sakshat Bhagavan. He is Bhagavan himself. Now, what's beautiful is, they then don't say, and therefore, because he's not Bhagavan, and he's gone against Madhava's teachings, everything he has brought forward is rubbish. They don't care about that issue.
Yeah, they don't go that far.
They'll say, the philosophies and the practices that the Gaudiyas make have to be, let's say, analyzed by their own merit, irrespective of any Sampradaya link or not link. And the fact that they've been doing this for hundreds of years, and it's nice, and they have their temples, and they have their communities, you do you. No problem. Do I think you're right? No. But that's not because of the Sampradaya issue. That's because you don't agree with Ramanuja's Vedanta.
Yeah. So they don't enter into the political Sampradaya games by looking over the fence at somebody else, deliberately trying to shoot and point fingers at the other movement to try and denigrate them, and then in the consequence bolster their own movement. So just to summarize your point, you're basically saying, Mahaprabhu got initiated. Now, there is some questions about the actual initiation, and then you know a lot about this. I know the theatre and so on. But the point is, he took initiation. He says, "I'm taking this one thing from you," which isn't a sign of legitimacy. It's actually almost a sign of refutation, saying that I don't really agree with anything else. I'm just going to pick this one thing.
The tone of the verse is like that. Is like that.
The tone is like that. It picks one thing and then goes on to do a completely different, relatively completely different movement to the original Sampradaya that he is initiated into, and that the lineage claims to be claiming their authority from, right? And what you're saying is other Sampradayas, maybe like the Śrī Vaisṇavas and so on, will just be like, look, we don't agree with that principle, but you just carry on. We just have our own thing. You have your own thing. But the need to go out and step out and criticize is just not there with them. That's the thing.
And they don't have that.
But how do you the Śrī Vaisṇavas and say Swami Narayan?
Swaminarayan.
So similar scenario, or?
So what I saw is in Swaminarayan, the Śrī Vaisṇava will say, yeah, we accept Swaminarayan because he said he took initiation in a dream, same as Swami Ramananda.
From Ramanujacharya.
From Ramanujacharya himself. But the fact that the devotee of Swaminarayan made their own Vedanta Bhashya later on.
I met the Swami who did it.
Yeah, they criticize. They say, look, your own Acharya accepted the Śrī Bhashyam from the Śrī Vaisṇava lineage, but now you are making your own. And at this stage, they say, okay, they deviate from Ramanuja, and therefore they are not part of us anymore. Right. But they don't say they're not bona fide. They don't have this concept even.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the mood I get from the Śrī Vaisṇavas is something like, look, we don't really care what all you guys are doing. No. We just want to stay pure and to our lineage, and keep the Parampara loyal to our previous Purva Acharyas. And as long as that stays the case, it stands the ground, we just don't care what anyone else is doing.
No, because it's
But if you mention
old.
Ramanuja, if you bring Ramanuja into your Parampara or whatever, then they'll start having an issue because they're like, in what way are you doing? And that's the point he's making.
Right.
So as long as Swaminarayan disciples were following Ramanuja's philosophy, okay. The minute they have their own Prashtantraya commentaries with a different Vedanta, different conclusion, they'll be like, well, they did. It was essentially, okay, now...
So they're saying you can't simultaneously hold on to Ramanuja and do your own commentaries.
No,
which is fine. I've got no issue with that at all.
Which makes sense because at that time, the authority of a Sampradaya came from the Bhashyam.
Yeah.
That's the thing. The Śrī Bhashyam was the authority of the Śrī Vaisṇava. It wasn't a verse in the Padma Purana.
Right.
It was a very different concept at that time.
Yeah.
Adi Shankara refuted everybody.
But
it's very strong.
Isn't that a funny thing in of itself? The authority of a Vaishnava Sampradaya was the Bhashyam, the commentaries on the Prashtantraya. That system is established by Shankaracharya, who's not in the four bona fide Vaishnava Sampradayas. So he essentially says, this is my philosophy established on the basis of Prashtantraya. No precedence for this. He's the first to do it. Ramanuja completely logically says, if I'm going to make a separate point, which he does, I'll use the same source material in order to showcase how you can get to a different conclusion, to refute.
Yeah.
Makes all the sense in the world. And then from that moment on, anyone else who wants to bring something, it also makes sense that they would comment on the same thing to show how even they got it wrong and there's something else to be seen in it, etc., etc., etc. But it all stems from a non-Vaishnava lineage, from outside the four bona fide Sampradayas, and now that is used as a stick within this four Sampradaya subset of people who think this is the way to measure legitimacy, as a stick to beat others with. I've been criticized by Gaudiyas, for example, who say, where's your Prashtantraya commentary? Without that, you're not legitimate Sampradaya. Yeah. And I'm like, what? Did you not realize that this comes from in Acharya outside the four Sampradayas? And you're saying, I can't be legitimate unless there is
and also there wasn't a Prashtantraya for the
and also I think that the Gaudiya, also the way they see Shankara, at least not all the Gaudiya, we should not make any
generalizations.
Yeah, in this case, because they are very, very different. So for example, Satyananda Das Babaji, so he has a great respect for Shankara.
Yeah.
Some other Gaudiya will say he was a Asura. He was a demon, you know.
Yeah.
So that you have a wide
also Śrī
scope.
Vaishnavas.
Yeah, but Śrī Vaishnava, I saw they also have some respect to Adi Shankar.
Again, both cases I don't want to generalize, but I think that I don't want to start to say now that it's only Gaudis are the only ones making this problem or that problem.
No. But I'm just saying that I saw many Śrī Vaishnava calling Adi Shankara a Vaishnava. They would have no problem to say, because he did his commentary, he did the Bhashyam on the Vishnu Sahasranam.
Yeah.
They will say he considered the highest Tattva as Vishnu, so he's a Vaishnava. But they don't even mention that there's only 4 Sampradaya.
But this comes to something I wanted to unpack. We haven't touched upon this yet. It's the legitimacy of great spiritual personalities outside of the 4 Sampradayas, right? So, and one of the sad outcomes of this emphasis on 4 Sampradayas is this. It's the denigration and rejection of these personalities who sit outside of these 4 lineages, right? When I spoke to Namarasa on his podcast, I mentioned the example of Mirabai and how, I had a conversation with someone that outright rejected Mirabai just on the basis of her initiation in Parampara, right? He, with all credit to him, explained the context and said that I wouldn't take that position, etc., right? Historically speaking, though, this extends far beyond just a personality like Mirabai, right? This has many other personalities that go into it. Let me give you an example of Swami Ramananda. You touched upon him when we were talking about Swami Narayan movement. And just as a point, Swami Narayan movement is huge, as we know. Well-established, huge temples.
Great temples.
Rich, beautiful culture, beautifully established. They're not technically in the 4 bona fide Sampradayas. They claim, as I said, that Swami Narayan, who was an incarnation of Bhagavan, was initiated in a dream by Ramanujacharya. Yeah, this claim is made. From my experience, it's rejected by most people who police this topic, right? The same thing happens with the other example I wanted to mention, which is Swami Ramananda, right? The Ramanandis. The Ramanandis are also extremely well established. They have a rich tradition, etc., etc.
Especially the sadhus.
Very much so. Very much so. And they have the same situation where Ramananda Swami is initiated in a dream by Ramanujacharya. Okay? The issue why I want to bring this up is the following. I was having a conversation with, once again, a Gaudiya, and they were challenging our legitimacy. And so we were, but in a reasonable way. So we were starting to dialogue, right? And at some point I bring up this example. I say, but look, there are extremely established Sampradayas, like the Ramanandi Sampradaya, they're essentially offshoots of these existing Sampradayas. It's like an offshoot of the Sri Sampradaya, claims initiation via dream, etc., etc. What's your stance on this? He says, full acceptance, because Ramananda Swami was Śrī Ram himself, right? And I listened to this, I can't believe I'm reading this. I cannot believe that this is the argument the person makes. I push back by essentially saying, on what basis do you believe that Ramananda Swami is Śrī Ram himself? Because the criteria that is always leveled at us for making the claim that Paramahamsa Vishwananda is an avatar is, where is it mentioned in Shastra? Because Mahaprabhu is mentioned in Shastra, which is a separate point that I also believe to be interpolation and nonsensical, right? There is no Shastric evidence for the divinity of Ramananda Swami. And yet they're comfortable accepting that claim. Why? Because it's a non-competing, non-intrusive claim. It's old. It's a dead personality, to put it bluntly.
Sampradaya politics.
Sampradaya politics. This is not a threat. Therefore, no problem. You guys are noisy neighbors. I don't like what you guys are doing. Therefore, the same logic I used to accept one, I will now use to denigrate you. It's silly beyond belief. If you speak to the general, let's say, Sanatana Dharma, Vaishnava landscape in India, do you not accept Ramananda Swami and the Ramanandi Sampradaya, or the Varkari Sampradaya and all their saints, or Swami Narayan? It's just a non-topic. Yeah. They're all so firmly established with such great personalities sitting outside of these 4 lineages. That these 4 lineages being propagated as the only way starts to create so much division that is extremely harmful.
So why this is particularly of concern to me, I call it political Vaishnavism. It's an importing of Abrahamic samskaras, right? We talked about this on our last podcast about exclusivity claims, Islam saying we're the only way, Christianity saying we're the only way, and so on. This is a pumped up version that has found its way into Vaishnavism. And if I see, there's many things that Guruji is doing on many levels, but one thing I can pick out that's clear to me is in establishing Hari Bhakta Sampradaya in our movement and tradition is to root out this samskara and put it in the bin. Put it in the bin so that we can all come together with a sense of unity, that we understand we are lost souls in this world of Maya, drowning in our own desires and stupidity. We are yearning for truth. We're yearning to have our souls freed and reach the feet of the Supreme Lord. That is what binds us. That is what we should focus on. And that is what we should celebrate, right? And we need to knock out this political Vaishnavism, this exclusivity, this supremacy claims, which are based on false ego pride, essentially, and insecurity. And we need to come together in a harmonious way. And that's why we're having this podcast. And I just want to reiterate, we believe, we have faith in Mahaprabhu.
Yes.
Right? Let me put that absolutely clear again, because we've said a lot of things in a sort of critical.
And also Ramananda also. Guruji plays him very high. He's a great personality. And Guruji references often in his satsangs and glorifies Mahaprabhu. We have deities in our temples of Nitai Gold deities here in different temples. So we place them on the divine status. They are divine personalities. But what we're critical of, again, I will reiterate, the Sampradāya Games and the political Vaishnavism and point scoring that's going on. That's what we're trying to take down.
Yeah. Before we forget this point, I just want to sort of touch upon it. We had mentioned in the original verse the issue of the mantra, that the mantra is fruitless unless it comes from the Sampradāyas. Vrishaparvaananda, do you want to just sort of tackle that?
Yeah, if we look at the verse, I think it's good too, because it's the first line, the Sampradāya Vihina, that if there's a mantra which is like, say, Sampradāya Vihina, which is without Sampradāya, which is not based on Sampradāya, then it is fruitless, nishfala. There is no fruits in that. It can't give you anything. And yeah, it's interesting, this concept, because even if you were to accept that, and you were to accept the traditional claim that they come from this deity and all this, you see, for example, in Vallabhacharya, who is linked with the Vishnu Swami, who is linked with Shiva, as per the verse. Vallabhacharya himself got vision of Krishna, and the mantra they use nowadays is completely different. This mantra he revealed, that Krishna gave to him, Brahma Sambandha mantra, also the other famous one, Ashtakshara, but from the Vallabha Sampradaya.
That's Sri Krishna
Sharanam Mama. Yeah, this one, the first one. And then the Brahma Sambandha, which is a hidden one, not known. It's based on that. So there is no concept of this mantra come from before Vallabhacharya. So what is the point of this verse?
So your point is basically, the whole point of this Padma Purana verse is to say your mantra must follow these channels of the four Sampradayas, right, which have the founding in Lakshmi and so on in these deities.
We see, even if we use the same concept as Mimamsa, that if we take the beginning and the end, Upakarma, Upasamara, the verse starts like that. It talks about mantra. It's a verse to say that how the Shakti of the mantra, as you say before, how the Shakti is passed down. But all the Sampradaya we mentioned, they don't even keep the mantra. Like the Hare Krishna Maha mantra is not in Madhva Sampradaya. In fact, Madhva Sampradaya, they don't have a Pancha Samskara concept. They don't give mantra like that. They do mantra Upadesh, which is the father give the Gayatri to his son, Upanayanam. And that's it. It's a very Vedic thing.
Yeah.
So even in these four Sampradaya, one is following a Vedic concept. The other three are following like agamic initiation. So even that, you have a huge problem.
So there's no consistency in mantra transmission, even amongst the four Sampradayas themselves, you're saying?
The Gaudiya, they will use the Kama Gayatri mantra. Kama Gayatri.
Yeah.
Where do you find that in Madhvacharya? You will not find that. Of course not.
So then the conclusion must be it's manufactured, right? And that's what the accusation could be. I wouldn't put it like that.
If you take the verse seriously, then Nishvara, then there is no fruits to this mantra. But there is so many saints in those Sampradaya.
But you take Hare Krishna Maha mantra.
Yeah, that's the point.
How many saints chant Hare Krishna Maha mantra, but Madhvacharya doesn't chant that. This is a foundational mantra. Now the thing is this: it's to be found in the Upanishads. You can find it in scripture. That's not the issue. But the verse isn't mentioning that the mantra has to be found in scripture. It's mentioning that you have to receive it through these disciplic lines
to get the Shakti of the mantra.
And that's the thing. And there's no question that. No. Now again, we know what the answer is going to be. So we're not trying to present an ignorant argument here. We know that the claim will be, but Chaitanya Mahāprabhu is Bhagavan himself.
Yes.
The Shakti of these mantras originates from Bhagavan. It's Bhagavan who gives it to Rudra, who gives it to Vishnu Swami, gives it to Vallabha, etc., etc., right? We understand that. So the argument is going to be Mahaprabhu himself has given the Shakti to this mantra, therefore it's no question. But again, the claim I'm making is that's only acceptable and tenable to the disciples of Mahaprabhu who accept him as divine, which is nobody else. The same thing is true of Paramahamsa Vishwananda. The same is true of Ramananda Swami. The same is true of Swami Narayan, etc.
Right,
etc.
So it's absolutely fine to make that claim that you just made. Mahaprabhu's God, and therefore he has a divine revelation and he gives it to us. But you can't then use that and go over the fence and point the finger at other movements and traditions which don't have the same Siddhanta or the same conclusions that you have, and then beat them with that.
Yes.
It doesn't make any sense. And that's what's happening constantly.
Yeah. And if they, again, the next, because I really want to almost tackle every criticism that is leveled at us one by one. And I know this, we've gone sort of, the nature of a conversation like this is less formal, less formatted in a way. But the other thing is this, is that then they will say, but each of those divinity claims is a little different. There's better evidence for some than others, right? I.e., they will point to Shastric verses, quote, referencing Mahaprabhu's divinity and saying that those are absent in the case of Swami Narayan, in the case of Swami Ramananda, in the case of Paramahamsa Vishwananda. Again, I think this is a stance that I don't begrudge them because it's what they've been taught within their Sampradāya. And I have a lot of time, patience, and sympathy for Gaudiyas today who are simply following what their acharyas have said, and they cannot bring it themselves to go against the word of their own acharyas. I respect and I understand that. It's an incredibly difficult thing we're asking them to do. Because if anyone jumps to this side of the fence, not to become a Haribhakta Sampradaya devotee, but just to the point of saying that the four Sampradaya concept is nonsense, there is a big leap done there. Logically, they may agree with everything we've been saying so far. They may be confronted by that historical reality, as we pointed out. But in doing so, they're still going to have to, in a way, reject what their acharyas have said.
But many Gaudiya scholars have.
I know, because they struggle with just how much it doesn't make sense, in a sense, right?
Because they come from academic concepts.
They're coming more from an academic, scholarly angle. So there'll be those who will say it's a faith-based situation, right? Which I want to respect. At the same time, we should unpack that in a second as well. But the issue I'm therefore bringing is this, is that if the issue, apologies, if the issue is, been struggling with sickness the last few days, if the issue is that, I lost my chain of thought now because of this. It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
Maybe as it comes back to me, the other part of this, you were talking about Mimamsa, that there's a beginning and there's an end to the verse. We dissected the mantra situation with the first one.
And
the bottom one is the Jagannath Puri part. Orissa, maybe speak on that while I recover my chain of thought.
It's just to mention that this verse itself say that they will appear in the holy city of Purushottama in Orissa, which is so obviously linked with...
That's not in all translations, though, of the Padma Purana verse.
No, I mean, it is in the verse.
It is in the verse.
It is in the verse.
In the Sanskrit.
It's not,
okay,
but it's not
enough.
always in the translation because obviously it makes no sense.
I just want to keep, sorry to keep interrupting, but you're basically saying that there are some translations that are given, they admit that part because it seems a bit
that's
dodgy.
The same point I wanted to make with the mantra.
Yeah.
It's not about the mantra, is the Kamagayatri authoritative, is this one authoritative. They are all authoritative. What I try to point out is the nonsense of this verse.
Yeah.
Like, how can such a verse say that the Brahma Sambandha mantra, given by Krishna to Vallabhacharya, who made so many saints, is Nishfala, doesn't give any fruits.
Yeah.
You know what? If you accept this concept, then you are in a huge nonsense. And then it say all these acharya, they come from Purushottama in Orissa.
Yeah.
We know the story of Ramanuja in Jagannath Puri.
Yeah.
They say Jagannath brought him somewhere else because he had a different concept. He wanted to bring some different worship. So what does Nimbaka has to do with Jagannath in Orissa? So this, I heard from a scholar also, who told me that, a Sri Vaishnava scholar, quite well known. He told me this verse it doesn't have to be a made up verse. It may have come from the Stala Purana. So there was maybe a Stala Purana for Jagannath Puri.
So there's things like Kula Puranas, which is like from a family lineage, and then Stala Puranas, which is for a location, right? Yeah. A Purana built for a location.
To praise this location.
To praise a location.
Or even in Skanda Purana, there is a lot of this praise of different tirthas. And it may have come in this thing to say that, in Jagannath Puri, he gave rise to all these great acharya. And this may have been the case. And then this has been taken by some personality in the time. And then Padma Purana, then Skanda Purana.
Praising Lord Jagannath as the origin of all these great personalities.
Exactly.
And when no one was looking, it got slipped into the Padma
You
Purana.
may have the same thing for Vrindavan, for Banke Bihari, for example.
Like he said, is that if you don't know where it comes from, you just go, Padma Purana or Skanda Purana or whatever.
And that's a very famous... I read books, beautiful books. It's from a Gaudiya scholar. Beautiful about Rasa, Tattva, beautiful things. How to chant in their own way. I was interested in just understanding the concept. All the verse quoted in the document, and there's plenty of them, not one use reference. It's only Kuma Purana, Padma Purana, Skanda Purana. All those verses, they have no basis. So you have this kind of situation. And that's where it's very, very different than Adi Shankara or Ramanuja, who are based on like a Vishnu Purana and the Upanishad, which is absolutely sharp in the
like
references.
I said, has a commentarial tradition preserved and been consistent in the manuscripts for centuries, and so therefore a very strong authoritative source.
Then you open also this verse come in Garga Samhita. They would say also. So Garga Samhita, there is two different texts. The one
So I'm going to keep. The reason why I keep interrupting you because I'm trying to give context. You're moving very quickly. I want everyone to follow you.
These verses are so.
So Padma Purana is where this verse that we've been talking about is coming from. But another source that is commonly quoted is the Garga Samhita. And
I mean, somebody can correct me, but it's also something that's the criticism.
Yeah,
they would say, but in Garga Samhita there is this verse also. But we know from scholar also, even Gaudiya scholar, the Garga Samhita they would say is a beautiful book for stories, but the very stories in
Satyanarayana Das says this.
He say that, But even in
don't take it as pramana
because the stories inside that they go against the Gaudiya Siddhanta, they go against Jiva Goswami, for example, Gopala Champu.
Gopeshwara
Mahadev is
how
there.
Shiva came to the Ras. These kind of situations.
How Radharani is being married. There's all these stories which are beautiful in a way.
Yeah.
That the Acharya may have told, but they are not in any way linked with the Bhagavatam. They are not accepted by Acharya.
So again, the Garga Samhita, a great text, wonderful text, but we need to know its context and its usage.
And what the Acharya who follow this kind of text say? They say it's just for stories.
Yeah.
It's not like pramana.
It's
in
not
any way.
to establish pramana. It's not to establish a movement, to establish mantra legitimacy, all these things. That's not what the Garga Samhita is here for. Right?
It's a very new text, obviously.
Very new.
This reminds me of the thread that I lost before.
Yeah. Right.
So the thread I lost before was I was talking about that they will make the distinction between the claim of divinity of Mahaprabhu and the claim of divinity of these other persons by saying that it's shastrically backed. Right? I want to invite every Gaudiya who believes this, that believes the divinity of Mahaprabhu on the basis of Shastric revelation, to think about it for a second. And it gets to the ridiculous point that I had two Gaudiyas commenting on my videos, very seriously, not sort of tongue-in-cheek, that if Guruji's God, why doesn't he have the signs on the bottom of his feet?
Yeah.
Just show the signs.
Yeah.
Take a picture of the bottom of his feet.
In darshan.
Divine signs, right?
And post on Instagram.
Now they say during online darshan they could have shown the.
Let me unpack this, right? So these claims, the divinity of Mahaprabhu, that are apparently abundant in scripture, not just one verse, abundant in scripture, were not spotted by any preceding Vaishnava. Now, unless they want us to believe that scholarly Vaishnavas only emerged post Mahaprabhu, that before that there were no Vaishnavas well-versed in Shastra, well-read in Shastra, inspecting Shastra, analyzing Shastra, which is nonsensical to the extreme. When you read the writings of Vedanta Deshika, when you see the scrutiny with which these acharyas went through Shastra, found all sorts of evidence in Shastra for all sorts of claims, it has no ground. It doesn't hold, right, this claim. I understand that there's an argument for that. He's a hidden avatar. It's not meant to be seen by others. It's a grace. You have to be graced in order to see this reality. Please reflect on how that sounds like from the outside. Please reflect on what that sounds like to a Sri Vaishnava or to anyone else listening to this. It's convenient to the extreme, right? Anyone can make some verses up, interpolate them into, let's say obscure Shastra, and then when no one else says, well, we don't have these verses in our copies of these Shastras, which they don't, by the way, we don't have this interpretation. Our acharyas don't agree to this, have not found this, etc., etc. Then the answer is, well, because you were not graced to find it. It's a hidden revelation. Yeah. Do I say this as, again, it almost needs repeating 10 times as a takedown of Mahaprabhu's divinity? No. It's a takedown of the argument for Mahaprabhu's divinity because it is nonsensical. The Bhagavatam, they say, where is all avatars are listed in the Bhagavatam. I've heard that criticism so many times. Wrong. Not all avatars are listed in the Bhagavatam, and you know that. The Bhagavatam lists 25 and then says, but the avatars of the Lord are many, innumerable, like rivulets coming from a river, innumerable, right? First canto. And so the issue I have with that is that it is making it extremely clear in authoritative Shastra, which Bhagavad Purana is, by most people's understanding, let's put it like this, that the avatars of the Lord are not fully listed in Shastra. That is actually the claim in Shastra, that the avatars of the Lord are not all mentioned in Shastra. Yeah, there are many mentioned, and I agree that following these is the safer route. Yeah, because it's guaranteed in a sense, right? But it is not a rule. It is not a hardline rule, and it is that scripture itself which says this is not a hardline rule. As I then said, if you therefore want to pick this fight, it looks, again, and I'm sorry to do this, it looks childish. You're so desperate to shoehorn your faith into evidenced claims like this that no one else accepts. And so it's like you've presented evidence for yourself. That's how silly it looks like from the outside. It's, let me put a bunch of verses so that I feel better about my belief. Because nobody outside of you accepts them. It's not, if you'd put in verses that at least convinced other people that he's God, who are in other Sampradayas, okay, you can see the merit to it. But if you've just put verses to pat yourself on the back, to say, he's God because look, the verses say so. What are you doing? It looks silly. Don't do it. I think, especially not when you then point the finger and say, you can't say this one is God because it's not in Shastra.
Yeah, if the argument is Mahaprabhu is God because Shastra says so, and you've got these millions of verses with really obscure interpretations and translations to really kind of like fudge the situation and so on, I would have more respect for the argument of someone saying, do you know what? I read Chaitanya Charitamrita, and I thought when I heard the Leelas of Mahaprabhu, it melted my heart, and I was crying, and I just felt like I want that love that he was talking about, and that for me, that's a legitimate argument.
And I trust the recognition of his disciples. His disciples see they seal Bhagavan in him. Yeah, you know, I resonate with those words. I feel it also. Yeah, no problem.
That to me is an honest, grounded argument. That's an argument for me, and I'll be like, you know what? Because you know why I can relate to that is because at some level it's happened to all of us. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that's why we look at that and go, fantastic. But when you start playing the Sampradāya games and the political Vaiṣṇavism card, it's just, you just have to take a deep breath and sigh and go, right, is this what we're reducing it down to?
Well, do you know what it looks like? It's Christians and Jews deciding, is Jesus the Messiah or not? So they'll both scrutinize scripture, because the basis of scriptural evidence that Jesus is the Messiah is in the Old Testament, prophecies. That's the only evidence for it. The prophecies, he came and fulfilled. And then it's just basically one group, Christians, another group, Jews, look at that and say, does he fit the criteria? And one comes to the conclusion, yes. And the other comes to the conclusion, no. That's it. But on that basis, no conclusion can be derived. It's just interpretation. So what is really at the core of it is faith. The Christian says, I believe in the divinity of Jesus Christ. The testimony of his disciples, which is the New Testament, his disciples saying, this is what happened. Chaitanya Charitamrita, this is what happened. This is just testimony about the lives of these great personalities. And they go, yeah, I believe in that. I have faith in that. Then you have your own pratibhigna, your own recognition, your own convictions, your own experiences that validate that, etc., etc., etc. But I want this to be understood perfectly clearly. If you keep going down this road, you look ridiculous to the outside. Now you also look ridiculous making the claim about Guruji.
It depends who you hang out with.
I get it.
If you're around circles where everyone's doing the same, chest out and beating that drum, then you're just emboldened by that, right?
Yeah, but nobody believes each other's claim. That's the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, I am well aware, no lack of awareness on our side. Someone will say, yeah, but your claim that Paramahamsa Vishwananda is divine is equally ridiculous. It looks ridiculous from the outside. I accept. I agree. In the sense that it's very difficult from someone completely out of the context, in no relationship, no witness, no experience, just at face value accepting a claim like that. No problem. No problem. But what you will not hear coming out of my mouth is a series of scriptural justifications that, look, prophecy for Guruji, prophecy for this. Yeah. You won't hear that from my mouth.
And there is verses we could use.
We could use. No doubt.
I'm curious. Go on.
No, because the same one from Bhagavatam that they used to explain Mahaprabhu. There's only one in Bhagavatam.
About the chanting.
We'll go chanting the congregational chanting of the holy names of the Lord. He will come in golden form, etc., etc. We can easily say the Guruji is fitting this criteria.
Especially because the verse Krishna Varnam, it starts like that, Krishna Varnam. And Sampradāya take it to mean Krishna Varnam to mean the syllables, that it chant the syllables Krishna.
Right.
But Krishna Varnam means black, of black skin, black colors.
Oh, because Guruji is dark.
And Guruji is dark, so this verse actually fit way better for him. And then, because then they say he is also very shining, and so it's not really a point.
This is what I'm saying, but you won't hear us make the argument.
No.
If you check the Gita Press version, if you check actually the not non-biased, but not the translation of the verse are very objective.
Yeah,
they translate it as like with the color of a sapphire. Shining dark like that. Right. So that's what the verse say.
But this is also where I want to stress how much faith plays a role in all of this, right? Because I want to talk about the Apta and how to identify such a person, right? I think it's good to unpack, because if we're saying don't follow the scriptural sort of claims, then what other way do we know about telling whether a Sampradāya is good or an Acharya is good or not? Yeah. But I just want to make the claim, one observation of how much faith is in all of this. First point of faith, all these Sampradāyas originate from these founding deities. Where's the evidence for this? Yeah, zero. It's just a faith-based claim, a logical faith-based claim, because as we highlighted, we have Narada Muni in two of these paramparas teaching different tattvas, different Vedanta.
And also, you will have Lakshmi and Brahma who are in complete contradiction.
Yeah, like they don't like each other.
Which is very difficult.
So faith-based claim. Second one, each of these acharyas has some divinity claim about them made. Ramanuja is Adishesh. Okay, faith-based claim. Is that in Shastra? No. Is that just the perception of people? Yes, brilliant, faith-based claim. Okay.
Madhva is
Vayu.
Yeah. Madhva's Vayu, and then also not only
but
that.
But he said himself.
Yeah, self-declared.
Yeah, self-declared. Okay.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to go into what would happen if Guruji started self-declaring on camera. Let's not go down that road, right? Yeah. But again, self-declared, fine. But people believe that the guru of Madhvacharya was who?
Vyas.
Veda Vyas. Yeah, in the 13th century, Veda Vyas was instructing Madhvacharya and giving initiation to him, right? So again, is that not a faith-based claim?
Absolutely.
But who is Veda Vyas we're talking about, right? Like there's no evidence for any of this except the astikas, those who have faith in this, right? They're going to say this is not an academic matter. This is not about evidence. Evidence is the wrong criteria with which to analyze all of this. Great, let's take that to its conclusion. If evidence is not the criteria by which you analyze this, use it consistently across the board. Chaitanya Mahāprabhu, Radha and Krishna in one. All his Panchatattva associates, myriad different personalities. The Goswamis, again, the same. It's funny how every single personality in that lineage is some divine being incarnated, right?
Yeah.
I don't say funny in a derogatory way. I'm saying it's so clearly established that this is a faith-based situation, right? On the realizations and revelations of the persons in and around them. But the thing is, every single movement has the same in their own way. They all have the same claims. In Swaminarayan, they say that each of the consequent ones who came after Swaminarayan, the successors, were also manifestations of different forms, of different stages of Bhagavan in their philosophy, etc., etc.
They don't have any problem to say Swaminarayan is the Parabrahman. He's a supreme form of Bhagavan. So
Shankaracharya is Shiva, etc., etc.
No, so what we have is a division that when it's expedient, you pick up a tribal narrative, right? Which is a faith-based tribal narrative, and you present it as absolute fact that cannot be questioned. And then when you find something that's not to your liking, you then use objective evidence. You start becoming like very analytical. You start putting the bar very, very high. Where is the evidence for that? I mean, the classic was Guruji's initiation. I mean, how many people used to criticize devotees and say, oh, did he really get initiated? You would never apply that same criteria with Madhva going to meet Vyasa and getting, his instruction. You would never apply that. That is tribal narrative based on faith, which we just accept. And so what we're finding is tribal narratives against truth, right? And when it suits us, when it suits the individual, we pick a tribal narrative. And when it doesn't suit, we go to the truth narrative.
It's the Bhagavad Parampara issue. So there are those within the Gaudiya movement and outside who believe that there's not only Diksha Parampara, like Pancharatrika Diksha Parampara, but also Bhagavat Parampara, which is that essentially you are following in the line of the great Mahabhagavatas. You find a great personality, and even if you don't have personal Diksha from that person, sometimes not even met that person, so cross-generational, if you sort of focus on that person, imbibe their teachings, follow in the same spirit of that person, it is a legitimate Parampara. What?
What do you say to that, Vrishaparva?
No, I want to hear your take on it.
I will, then feel free to compliment. I have no issue with that as a factual claim that actually you can do that. You can sit and have someone, be so focused on them that you can legitimately call yourself their disciple. So faithfully follow their teachings and whatever else, even if you never met them, okay? But to present that as bona fide parampara, that therefore there's an unbroken chain, right? What do these words even mean anymore? What does unbroken even mean? If now it's just some subjective situation where I feel like I'm sincerely following his teachings, there's no checking from the actual person. I accept this person as my disciple. He's actually following my teachings properly. I empower him to give it to the next one. None of that is going on. You've just basically put a picture of someone in front of you and said, I'm now your disciple. I'm in an unbroken chain and I can give Diksha to the next one in the line of this person without ever having the authority to do so by this person.
Yeah.
It's both. So in one sense, I say, fine that you claim this. There is some evidence in Shastra that one can do this.
Give me examples of that. Do you know? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's two issues. So the Gaudiya Sampradaya, their parampara has holes in terms of Pancharatrika Diksha. So they'll have generational gaps, right? Well, they'll say that this is mediated by the point of Bhagavat. So when you say that, for example, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and in the parampara that they cite, Jagannath Das Babaji is above him, but they never actually took Diksha from each other. And you take the example of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati taking sannyas, imparting upon himself the orange clothes and taking the danda in front of the picture of Gorakshar Das Babaji, right? Who himself was not a sannyas. So again, sometimes the Bhagavat Parampara principle is invoked to defend these different situations and different instances.
Where there was not an actual meeting and transfer of Diksha initiation.
How do they say? Because if Bhakti Vedanta Saraswati took the danda and the sannyas clothes, how do they say that it's come from this Bhagavat Parampara if this concept of sannyas was anyway out of the window?
Because they'll say
the
spirit was aligned. So he's taking these things upon himself in order to follow the spirit of the instruction of spreading the mission and whatever else. And this is only being taken as a tool,
so
in a
only
sense,
as a preaching,
as a mechanism in order to further the intentions of the acharyas. So I'm not, again, fair argument. I'm not going to necessarily shoot it down.
And if anyone said that to me from ISKCON or whatever, I'll be like, fantastic. If that's what you believe, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's just, you cannot use that as a measure to beat anyone else with.
It's cherry picking, the strictness and the rigidity and the rules, and it's like God of the gaps type of thing. Like you just keep like saying this, that, and the other to justify every type of.
You keep pivoting to different ideas. Yeah. And you know what it also is? You know when the Christian saints, for example, like in the Catholic Church, right? I think Rajiv Malhotra made this point that they always make them saints after they left the body. Right?
It's a rule.
It's a rule. Okay. So why is it a rule? I mean, cynically, you could just say it's because when they're alive, they're a liability, right?
It's not cynic, it's the fact.
Right. Okay. It's a fact. You're going further than me. But it's basically where you would say, look, we don't know what they're going to say. What if they go rogue? What if they challenge the church, the Pope, and whatever it is? We can't trust them. But when they're dead, we can write their history as we want. We can interpret their words as we want. We can build up their whole persona, and then we can elevate them to a divine status.
The only criteria by which you grant sainthood in the Catholic Church is 3 miracles, 3 verifiable miracles that are agreed upon by a consensus council, right? Then there's 3 stages upon they can become eventually sanctified. There's nothing stopping them from analyzing these miracles while they're alive. Miracles happen when they're alive also, not only when they die. Often the miracles happened when they were alive and are only scrutinized much later in order to validate their sainthood. So there is only one justification for why it never happens when they're alive, and it's exactly that. It's that you don't want these people to then make a problem for you. You make them a saint today, tomorrow they criticize the church. Exactly well put, right? The same thing happens in Vaiṣṇavism too. Like I said, the Gaudiya who says Ramananda Swami, Ram himself, no problem. But he's gone. He's not here walking and talking right now.
It's a very easy claim. It's a very easy claim.
But it's what the Bhagavat claim, Bhagavat Sampradāya, Parampara claim, is kind of based on that. It's a hindsight claim and you just go, oh, but he was such a great personality, and he's following the same realization, teaching, and so on as a previous person. So therefore, you can find a chain.
It will happen everywhere. It happens everywhere. Take Christianity, modern Christianity. I am sure there are a lot of Christians that if Jesus looked upon them right now, would be like, that's not what I taught. Like I don't sign under that. Right? But because that's not happening, Jesus is not walking around telling them that. They walk around convinced and telling everyone else, I am a Christian in the most legitimate sense, without any validation from Christ in that sense, right? The same thing happens with everyone. Will happen with Guruji. Will happen with Guruji too, right? There are people who I meet today. I was having a conversation with someone, Prabhupada disciple. And I was like, oh, Prabhupada disciple, but you're young. And they're like, yeah. But I never met him, but I'm following Prabhupada. He's my guru. Okay, nice. As I said, it's possible for me. I don't discount that possibility. But I immediately saw some behaviors and some beliefs, especially they were verbalizing some beliefs that I was like, well, I know for a fact Prabhupada disagrees with that belief. Like he spoke very clearly and strongly against that particular stance that the person had. And then I go, isn't it a funny situation that you're so convinced that you're a disciple of Prabhupada and you're so happy to be one, but if Prabhupada would to be now in front of you and hear what you just said, he would chastise you for it, right? The same thing is, as I said, going to happen to Guruji. It happens across the board. It happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. So my point is that some may follow indeed faithfully and some may not, but you'll never know because the Acharya is not here to actually say yes.
And who decides?
Who writes the history? And
who decides what is the Bhagavat Parampara? Right?
Who decides who's in Mahabhagavata?
Right. Again, where is it? So where is this all pointing to? It's pointing down to how you feel.
Faith.
Your faith, your conviction. Yeah, what has rocked your world? What has captured your heart? And that is the thing that the political Sampradāya Games tries to distract from. Yeah. It tries to put layers and layers and layers so that we don't just come to the very obvious truth, which is we are following this path because we have fallen in love with this path, right? And we feel this strong conviction that this is what my life is, this is what my purpose is. And all of this is a distraction from that simple, grounded truth.
I completely 100% sign under that. I agree. Yeah. I want to then, as a result of that, because we have to give the devil his due in a sense, right? What are the problems that Sampradaya brings to the table and what are the benefits it brings to the table? Because I think that has to be explained because we are Sampradaya, Hari Bhakti Sampradaya. So clearly we see some value in it, right? So what you started to touch upon now is one of the major problems that it brings to the table. When Sampradaya presents something rigid or structured, let's put it like that, right? The downside of it is that it can become so rigid and so structured that it actually limits spiritual experience. It limits transcendence. Because anything that a person may experience in their connection with God, with Krishna, if it doesn't conform to the priorly existing experiences and whatever else that may happen, it will be rejected. Not only by the persons in the Sampradaya, but the person who had that experience will have to, in a sense, reject their own experience because it doesn't conform with what is expected of them in that Sampradaya. So Sampradaya, when applied too rigidly and too dogmatically, can actually almost do the opposite of connecting you to God. It can almost prevent you from transcending and experiencing God without limitations. Let's put it like this, right? On the flip side, and this is something that I do think is very valuable in Sampradaya, it does serve to protect, because there are cheaters out there. There are. There are people who are making up stuff. There are people who are trying to cheat people. There are people who believe that they are incarnations when they're not, and they want to convince others of the fact. There are bogus teachings out there. So I do think a tried and true tested method over centuries with many personalities, proving a sort of, let's say, consistent churning of saintly personalities and whatever else, does have immense value. Yeah, and if you are a nominal Vaishnava in the world, you suddenly want to get more connected and you're looking for initiation, you're looking for a guru, I would not begrudge them looking to the Sampradaya model, the traditional Sampradayas, and looking at them and saying, this seems like the best route, the safest route to go down. I don't disagree with that. However, and I want to say this as a let's say my main takeaway from this. If you close the door to prevent the demon from getting in your house, just make sure the door's still not closed when God comes knocking. There's a reason we close doors to keep out intruders and unwanted guests.
Yeah.
Rigidity, I get it. Structured and a walled garden, I get it. But what do you do when the one you want, God, Krishna, comes to you from outside the garden and knocks on your door?
You treat him like a demon.
The door's closed.
Yeah.
You're not getting in.
Yeah.
And that's the tragic situation. Now, what's the ratio? There's going to be 999 demons to the one Bhagavan. Yeah. So I understand, again, I'm giving a lot of let's say, merit to the walled garden approach. I get it. There's a lot of cheaters, there's a lot of fraudsters, there's a lot of deviants and all this sorts of stuff. So I get that you want to protect the sanctity of the thing. It's the Śrī Vaisṇava spirit. Purity, keep this. Hold,
orthodoxy.
Hold, right? I get that. I really, really do. And it will help you to a large extent. But if that one time it blocks out divinity, as I said with Namarasa, the Gaudiya says no to Mirabai on the basis of her Parampara, on the basis of initiation, not on anything else. Not on, and again, I accept that he gave a different perspective on it. But in general, that a Gaudiya right now will reject Paramahamsa Vishwananda because of these kind of things.
Yeah, think of the treasures that you're missing out on as a result of that. But Vrishaparvaananda, what's your take on? We've talked about very orthodox. What about the Vakari Sampradāya and the Sant tradition and so on? I mean, they seem to have what Swami Revatī was saying, a kind of halfway hybrid house. They've got some rules, regulations, whatever it is, but there's a liberalism there, right?
But they have I think they have a huge problem also. It's because they didn't make any Sampradāya.
Right.
And the thing is that I was just watching the other day some Sufi singing and discussing about Kabir.
Yeah.
Kabir, which is such a great personality, maybe one of the greatest sant that existed in the recent time. But the thing is that some would say Kabir was Sufi, some would say he was Hindu, nobody knows. So the very core of the teaching, nobody knows. And so you are in India and you will see that there's different places, different village, they will sing Kabir, praise Kabir, follow Kabir. But they
don't actually know what Kabir teaches.
But not even the teaching, but the religion itself. They don't agree that Kabir was...
No clarity.
No, there is no clarity on who he was. Like, he became a person which is very difficult to understand.
Right.
Like, because there was... And then you have, for example, Kabir Pant. And then the people, for example, some Sufi would say the Kabir Pant has become way too orthodox.
Right.
According to what Kabir actually was teaching at this time. So but I still think the Sant and, like you mentioned, Mirabai, Haridas. Ramananda also is very linked with that. In fact, Ramananda is even mentioned in the Guru Granth Sahib of the Sikh. So I think if you're, like some example you have given, if you are too strict on Sampradaya, you just miss all those things. And for me, in many ways, the truth is in those mystic personality.
Do you want to talk about like punts, like a Sant mat versus a Sampradaya?
Yeah. I mean,
you see what I mean? A lot of truth of realization.
So we're acknowledging the tension between this kind of liberal stance and a very dogmatic stance. But also
the fact that if you accept the Too Orthodox stance, then you remove all of them. And then you have to say Mirabai didn't know Krishna. Yeah. And that's a crazy thing to say.
Yeah. And people are forced into that corner sometimes.
Especially read the poetry, read the things they wrote.
Yeah.
How can you say this person didn't know?
I'm generally a fan. Even on a political level, let's say, the state should have minimal control, right? And the citizen should have freedom. Now, with freedom comes responsibility and risk, right? And I would rather a Sampradaya be a legacy that creates consistency to a specific personality. And it's upon the devotee, the seeker, to go, this doesn't make sense to me, or this does make sense to me. I connect with this, I don't connect with this. The onus is on the seeker, right? What the Sampradaya tries to do, it tries to be, in my opinion, like the big state. It tries to be the answer to everything, the solution to everything, the authority on everything. And then it starts to become authoritarian, dictatorial. And then you start to find that anything that lands outside of this is criminal, right? There are parallels there. When it starts to become the big state. And I think Guruji what Guruji is doing is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. And the reason why I say this is he is laying down, yes, the rituals, the monastic order. He's laying down the philosophy, which we'll touch upon in the next podcast, the details and mechanics. But you see his magnanimity. You see the way he operates with other devotees, the way he brings in saints and from all kinds of traditions, even from Christianity, Sufi saints here and there, but still brings it into the nature of Vaishnava and promotes this idea of love and elevates this idea of surrender. You listen to one of his satsangs, whether you're a devotee or non-devotee, whether you're Christian or a Muslim, you can listen to one of his satsangs and you can feel part of what he has to say. And so he has somehow struck this phenomenal balance of the tension of Sampradaya and dogmatism and the free-fall liberalism that can be very dangerous. And he's married it together. And that's why I think Hari Bhakti Sampradaya, call me biased if you want, but I think for the 21st century, it is a Sampradaya of modern times that I believe is unparalleled and got that balance right.
Yeah. I obviously agree. I want to make a comparison to what you just said so that everyone can understand. Take the Christian world. You have, as they say, Orthodox Christianity, you have evangelical Christianity. So the Orthodox Christianity is more like the Sampradayas. Walled garden, very traditional, very authentic, no growth almost. Like, this is misleading. They do get some people, but much more confined, much slower, much more of a grind in a sense. Mm-hmm. Evangelical Christianity, explosion. People upon people, all walks of life. It's a very easy thing to get into. Now, you could argue that pros and cons. One of the cons of evangelical Christianity is that it can often be philosophically and theologically shallow, right? It can often bring in some heresies and whatever else. And whereas orthodoxy is profound and deep and all of this, right? But what if we can get something down the middle that incorporates the best of each, that brings the profound nature, the depth, the orthodoxy has, but also presents it in a way that is way more open for people to come into this without this sort of like dogmatic sectarian mentality? Because one of the issues that the Sampradaya presentation, the 4 exclusive Sampradaya presentation brings to the world is it makes us look like dogmatic sectarian people. The Vaiṣṇavism, which is not a widespread thing in the world. We like to think it is. In India, yes. Outside of India, obviously ISKCON's done a phenomenal job.
Amazing, yeah.
But it's a minor thing, minor. We've not made any real, strides into the general like populations and all of this. And one of the reasons for that is, it's the walled garden. It's how, in a sense, what's the word I'm looking for? Gated the community is. Like, it's so controlled and it's so rigid and it's so this, that, and the other. It's not good. It's not good. We need to think of the bigger picture, and we really need to think about, if we really mean Loka Sangraha, if we're really here to do something good for the people, then try to bring that which is good in a way that will not create us versus them and division and fights and all of these types of things. And there, I agree with you. Guruji is doing something that is the closest to that I can possibly imagine.
Because fundamentally, he teaches us, while being initiated, while being loyal to our tradition and our faith and our movement, he teaches us that Krishna is bigger than any Sampradaya, right? Krishna is bigger than any Sampradaya. He can find any jiva in any context, in any situation. You can have a guy who has never read the Bhagavad Gita, knows nothing about Shastra, has no Siddhanta, and Krishna can reach him and give him the highest level of love you could possibly imagine. Guruji's open to that. Guruji is open to that, right? And we as Vaishnavas need to imprint that on ourselves and realize Sampradaya is a wonderful thing. It's a highway. It's a legacy. It's consistency. Because clarity, all of these things, like you talked about Kabir and the difficulties in that. It gives all of those things. But at the end of the day, that's our path. That's my path. And for us, it will be the highest of the high, right? And there's nothing wrong in that. There's nothing wrong in declaring that. But understand, Krishna can find any jiva in any soul in any context.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And on that spirit, I was writing the blurb for the back of the book, and I was traveling with Guruji when I did it, and I wrote it and I sent it to him, so I showed it to him so he could give his approval, and he liked it a lot. Because one of the things that I put here that I'd really try to capture is his spirit, like what is his real intentions for this. And I had a passage, I had to remove it in the end because it was too long. It didn't fit in the back of the book, so I had to do an edit. But it was a passage that essentially spoke about choice, that we have a choice whether to unite or divide. Yeah. And that one of the things that yoga Bhakti Yoga, relationship with God is all about, in a sense, choosing to unite with him, choosing to connect, not to be independent and separate, but to come together, right? And that the Vaishnavas need to take that spirit across their lives, need to take that spirit across other, let's say, facets of their life. We can choose the periphery of a Sampradaya or the core of the Sampradaya. And I do strongly hold this belief. At the periphery, we're all going to be very divided. Because at the periphery of Sampradayas means the shape of your tilak, the clothes you wear, your customs, the specificities of sadhana, which means like the mantras you chant, the exact, processes and all of this. There's going to be a lot of distinction, differentiation, division, etc., etc. But that's the periphery. At the core, what do we have? Śrī Hari is the supreme in his myriad forms, and love and self-surrender towards him as the primary objective of life, the primary means. We're Nitya Das, eternal servants of him. That is the fundamental core. There's no need to complicate it more than that.
Yeah.
God is Śrī Hari, and we are his eternal servants in love and surrender. Right?
Yeah.
If we just focus in on that, we can choose. It's a choice. We can choose.
That's it, yeah.
To stand together and hold hands and literally say, we're on the same path, despite peripheral differences. Or we can choose to give more importance to the periphery and say, we cannot stand together. Because one thing that it doesn't hurt me, it goes too far, but it makes me sad, is that someone like Namarasa was extremely vilified for having me on his podcast.
He's very courageous.
Yeah, and I commend him for it, But the fact that just having a conversation with me makes him the object of criticism. Not for the contents of the conversation even, but the very fact that you sat down with someone like him.
Yeah,
right?
This is.
If this can't be called out, if they can't take a step back and look in the mirror and realize how ridiculous that is, they have to. And I'm sorry, Namarasa, because I don't want to make this into a ISKCON bashing game. It's not only ISKCON. We've had Sri Vaishnavas do what's it called? Like campaigns online to about against Bhakti Marga and whatever else, because we have a Ramanuja on our altar. So their issue is they have Ramanuja on the altar, but they don't follow strict Sri Vaishnava principles, right? Instead of just going, well, wait a minute, they're glorifying Ramanuja and they're not making any claim that they are following authentic Orthodox Sri Vaishnavism. That's nice. Great. They're spreading the glories of Ramanujacharya. Fantastic. And it's choice.
Yeah.
It's just choice.
Guruji in Vittaladam, he was talking about this Vaishnava conflict in the Holy Lake Festival we had. And he talked about the different tilaks that we wear. And, the feet of Narayana, that's what we say, the foot of Narayana. And he was simply saying, Krishna has many postures, right? And because of that, the shape of tilaks will differ. Right? 1 minute he's standing like this, like Vittal, feet together. The next minute he's playing the fruit with the feet crossed over. He has different postures, and therefore you have different Sampradayas. It was such a poetic way. And people might say, oh, it's just poetry. No. He was making a very profound point. Krishna has many postures, many moods, and the Sampradayas are accessing all these multitudes and facets of Krishna. And there are many other facets that are beyond even Sampradaya itself. Right?
Like
and let's understand
this.
this. And like the Sant tradition, like you said.
I fully agree. I want to bring this all to a close, and the way I want to do that is we've talked a lot about the criticisms, the sort of what Sampradaya is not, how it should not be used, the arguments that should not be made. Even though this is the second time we're doing this, I'm always left thinking there's more that could be said, there's more that could be expanded on. But I'm very comfortable where we've taken this. But I want to bring it to one final point, which is, how should a Sampradaya be then? Like, what is the actual criteria for a Sampradaya if these things are not it? If it's not, it has to be one of the 4 bona fide ones as stated by Padma Purana, etc., etc. Then what are we actually saying? If someone were to say, okay, through all that criticism, what is your actual claim of what a Vaishnava Sampradaya should be? Vrishaparvaananda, do you want to do that?
Yeah, I think I saw also in some Sri Vaishnava groups. One day, one scholar made a very nice point with the Vakari, because the question came to him like, why do you...
This is the one who worship Vittal.
Yeah, Vakari worship Vittal. It was from Tukaram or Eknath Maharaj maybe. So this poetry came, this Abang came on the group. And some were asking like, but is this Vakari even authoritative or whatever? And this scholar was saying, look, they are worshipping Śrī Hari. They are worshipping Srimad Narayana. Like we have the Narayana Suktam, Narayana Mainyam, Vishwatmanam Parayanam. this kind of verse, they were quoting this verse and saying, look, they are worshipping the same supreme being. That makes them authoritative.
Yeah.
Just on that basis. I think, and maybe you would agree, they should be a bit more than that. It can't be only that, because anybody can worship
Right.
Srimanarayana and say, it doesn't make you authoritative. I think what this scholar was making in quoting Eknath and Tukaram, he was saying the realized personality who has that experience, who is like Krishna. Because you see in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna say, Vedanta Krit, he is the one who created the Vedanta, he is the only knower of the Veda, Vedavid, Evam.
Chapter 15, verse 15.
Yeah, he's the only one who knows these things. So truly speaking, only he can say something about the Veda. Only he can make a Siddhanta, to be honest. Or somebody who has attained his nature, who know him. So in that sense, the realized personality, if they worship Śrī Hari, this make the full Sampradaya very authoritative. Because it's the very core of any scriptures. The Sri Vaishnava, they will push that, all the Veda lead to Narayana, the Bhagavatam lead to Narayana. So if you worship this core, if you follow the core of the things, then that is the authority, I would say.
I would agree with you that for me would qualify as a Sampradaya, and if that legacy was passed on. For practical purposes of that Sampradaya, for the welfare of that Sampradaya to survive, it should be, I believe, this should be fleshed out a bit more.
Justification.
In which sense?
So like I said, we put together this Siddhanta. The reason why we've done that is because it's to flesh it out. It's just to flesh it out so that it consolidates Guruji's satsangs, the Guru Vakya, it consolidates it for a legacy to come, for generations to come. And that will ensure the health of the Sampradaya. It's why the Goswamis did what they did.
How it's linked with this Vedic revelation.
If you ask me what makes a Sampradaya authoritative, if you have an Apta, a great master, a great personality who worships Śrī Hari, and that is distilled down to some disciples and it's carried on through some generations, that's very good. But I would say for the welfare, there should be an aim to get more fleshed out.
Yeah, I mean, so I think those are the three factors then. I definitely agree with you, Mayuran. I think there has to be, don't leave things to assumption, don't leave things to interpretation. Like map out as much as you can map out how what are the touch points between the personality, Shastra, the wider tradition, and then systematically present it as a sort of justification.
So would you say this is a difference between the Sampradaya and the Pant, let's say, the Sant Mat?
Yes, that and a couple more. Yeah, I'll come to that, but let me just sort of map this clearly for people. So 3 criteria for a Sampradaya to be legitimate as per what we've been saying now. First, that there is the worship of Śrī Hari as supreme. And that's universal in all Sampradayas. Everybody
Vaiṣṇava
qualifies.
Sampradaya.
Yeah, Vaiṣṇava Sampradayas. Second is that it is in alignment with Vedic revelation. It's in alignment with Shastra. Yeah. Now that is obviously disputed, but that's the nature of it. Yep. It's that everyone has different interpretation, and nobody's going to dispute the fact that there can be different interpretations.
And there should be some effort to justify it.
Of course, it's not trivial.
Siddhanta,
there has to be several sort of scriptural touch points where it really defends the philosophical position that you're taking, which is what we've done in this work, in this Siddhanta. And then third, that the person who has created said Sampradaya, or who is propagating said Sampradaya as the Acharya, is of the nature of Krishna, because as you said in chapter 15, verse 15, Krishna is the only one who knows truly the Veda and Vedanta, right? And so one has to be of that nature. One has to, in a sense, be in connection with Krishna, one who has seen the truth, give the truth, and seen not in I'm looking at it, but realized, in chapter 4, verse 34 as well. So this is the real criteria for Sampradaya. Yeah, not what Parampara, where it originates from. It can originate from anyone who meets this criteria of being of the nature of Krishna, of being of Tattvadarshi, realize Krishna, because Krishna is actually, as you correctly put it, beyond Sampradaya. And Krishna is the source of knowledge. Krishna is the source of Vedanta. Krishna is the source of all of this. If you are one with Krishna in that sense of union, of you are realized in Krishna Tattva, you can give authority. You can give Vedanta. You can give Sampradaya. You can give Siddhanta, right? And then it has to be provable that it is aligned with Shastra and worshipping Śrī Hari. I think we more than qualify for all 3 of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is there to establish that clearly, so that anyone who wants to scrutinize that claim can do so.
Yeah.
To touch your point about the difference between a Panta and the Sampradaya, I don't want to leave that untouched. You see, I think the difference...
Just to tell us what a Panta is very quickly.
So a Panta is like a Sant Mat. It's where instead of a structured Parampara system, it is essentially gravitating around a personality, that there is one person and everything rests upon that person. Now, the lines between Pant and Sampradaya are actually not as distinct as people like to think they are. They're far more similar than they are different. I would say one of the few characteristical differences is the Sampradaya do tend to have some more traditional elements, such as Prashtantraya commentaries that the Pant will not have, for example. I think that there is a greater emphasis in the Sampradaya model placed on the worship of God or the sadhana or whatever it may be that extends beyond that original apta, that original personality, whereas in the Pant movement, everything gravitates back towards that person exclusively. So it's not that the apta doesn't have the same authority in the Sampradaya. It does, but I think it's less exclusive. So in the Sampradaya, there's the authority of the apta and the authority of tradition and scripture marrying. Whereas in the Pant movement, it's just the authority of that personality exclusively. But because there's authority of personality in both, and it all stems from that personality, there's far more similarity than there is difference in that sense, right? Mm-hmm. As I said, Sampradaya is a little more structured because it has Prashtantraya commentaries. It has traditionally, it has, let's say, more that extends out from the person to almost to the point where these days, you can have someone who is well-versed in Achintya Bheda, who follows all of the principles as put down by the Goswamis, and who has little connection to Mahaprabhu, or little, let's say, direct, let's say, worship of Mahaprabhu. I'm not saying that they obviously disregard Mahaprabhu, that wouldn't happen, but it can happen. You can be a full-fledged Gaudiya without much of Mahaprabhu in your life. Whereas, how can that be true of a Sant Mat, a Pant, for example, like Kabir Pant? If you're in a Kabir Pant, your life revolves around Kabir. There is nothing else. It's almost like Kabir's grace is the only determining factor. They might push back
on that if you're a Gaudiya. They would say, no, Mahaprabhu is absolutely central.
No, he is central. He is central. Yeah. But I'm saying that I know Gaudiyas who, they don't focus on Mahaprabhu in any sense. Not that they disregard him, but it's more like Krishna, 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 Krishna. Right? I don't mean it in a derogatory way in that way. No. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So in that sense, I think we're again beginning to toe more towards the Sampradaya line, hence why we called it a Haribhakta Sampradaya, and we can't sit here and say that we're a Pant in that sense. There is joint authority of Guruji, Shastra, tradition. Guruji consistently points us to the study of Shastra.
And also the commentary he gave on the Bhagavad Gita, this is just, you will not see that in a Sant Mat. They will just not do that.
Yeah.
They will just say the Vani of the Guru, the speech of the Guru is the Shastra.
But Guruji actually points to Shastra as an inherent divine authority outside of himself.
Yes.
And that's the difference.
You're right.
That's a huge difference.
It's the Vedic, let's say, authority. Where he acknowledges that independent of himself, that there is Vedic authority, whereas the Pant will often, so everything is seen only through the authoritative lens of the person.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I think, again, I don't want to extend this too far. I think we're hitting almost 2 hours here in today's episode, and this is one of 3. As I said, we're going to have 2 more episodes. Mm-hmm. The next one will be in this configuration again, and the third one will be joined by Rishi Sahadev, together with myself and Mayuran. Next topic will be Tadatmya Vedanta. So we're going to basically break down what is actually the philosophy of the Haribhakta Sampradaya. It's the title of the book, Tadatmya Vedanta, so it's going to be incredibly compelling. So please do come back to watch that episode. I think it will answer a lot of questions. So today's episode was more about a critique, setting the landscape for why we are making this Sampradaya the way it has been made, why Guruji did it, because there is something to be corrected. There's something to be fixed, and that is being attempted rather successfully, I would say. Next phase is to actually dive into just Shastra and philosophy and really present it as it is. And then, as I said, we'll evolve that again into the third episode. Any final thoughts?
I mean, we can just mention that this discussion we had is also in the book. In a very summarized way, but this is there also. In the first chapters, we have also.
We have, as part of the Siddhanta, we have a whole new outlook on what Sampradaya is, right? And I think that's explained in the book, in the introductory sections of it.
And maybe just because I know you've been invited previously to debate sort of the more traditionalist Sampradaya movements and whatever else, we are open to dialogue, right? If someone listens to this and still has, reasonable pushbacks, they don't agree with some of the points we've been making, let's do it, but let's do it in a civilized way. Because if the response to this video is the very same thing we've been criticizing, which is just to throw some...
You're not bona fide, you're not authoritative.
Save
Padma
yourself...
Purana verse
quoting the Padma
Please
Purana.
save yourself the
again.
trouble. Just save yourself the trouble. It's just boring. And it's like...
It's not useful.
Either we elevate this conversation and we take it to a serious level, let's say logical, academic, scholarly, ethical, or we're just basically showing the world how childish and silly we all are, playing political games, children's games, the Sampradāya Games, as we mapped out. So this is really to rectify that, to put an end to that, and if someone wants to, we can have the conversation at a proper level. Let's put it like this. But otherwise, save yourself the trouble. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.